This is Floyd Barber of Tucson, Arizona. He's a 91-year-old Korean War veteran who saved up just enough cash to get his teeth fixed. But on his way to the dentist, he stopped off to get gas with that envelope of cash in his pocket, and he was robbed by some trash woman who was soulless enough to rip off an elderly man at the gas pump. The woman got away and left Floyd standing there. All his cash he saved up for his teeth repair gone. Now, Floyd was naturally feeling pretty down and out about the situation, so he sought some comfort at his favorite restaurant, one he visits at least once a week, and his usual order is soup and a glass of milk. His server, Sherry, asked him how his day was going, and he spilled the story of his robbery. Sherry was taken aback, and as a mom and a daughter of veterans, she, like the rest of us, was in disbelief someone could do something so horrible to a man she described as the kindest soul. Sherry was determined to help him get his money back, so she reached out to the local news station and got Floyd on the broadcast, and she also set up a GoFundMe in his name. And in less than a week, the fund exceeded the goal of $10,000 as strangers and community members pitched in. Some, not knowing how to use GoFundMe, just walked up and gave Floyd some cash. Now, Floyd says the kindness of Sherry and those who pitched in restored his faith in people, and just reading the story, it helped restore mine. Look, this country is very divided right now, and it's likely going to get worse. Democrats are fighting Republicans, Republicans are fighting Republicans, and the vitriol and the spite and the injustice is already overwhelming. So it's easy to get caught up in it and cynical. But stories like Floyd serve as a reminder most people are good and decent and kind. So God bless our elderly, God bless our veterans, and God bless America. May we all fight the temptation to harden our hearts, even when it gets rough out there.
I just signed this veto because legislation passed by the Congress would put at risk the retirement savings of individuals across the country. They couldn't take into consideration investments that wouldn't be impacted by climate, impacted by overpaying executives, and that's why I decided to veto it. It makes sense to veto it.
Because nothing says unity quite like vetoing a bipartisan initiative to end woke investing. Do you really want climate activists and green-haired liberal causes infiltrating your retirement plan? Well, Joe thinks you do, or rather, Joe's handlers who pull his strings. Joining me now with her take on that and so much more is former Assistant Secretary of the Treasury, Monica Crowley. Monica, it's great to see you.
You too, Tommy. Thank you for having me.
So there's a lot to get to, but I want to start with this because we know that the Trump news has taken up much of the headlines this week, but I still think that this is really important. It's the first veto. It's a bipartisan action to end this ESG woke investment, but the way that Biden's trying to explain it to the American people is that he's fighting the mega Republicans to keep special interests out of it. What do you make of that, and how do you explain it to the average person who might fall for his BS?
So the really important thing for everybody to understand here is that Joe Biden is using the energy sector as the biggest lever to accomplish the Great Reset here at home, or what Obama once called the fundamental transformation of the nation. Because the energy sector is the biggest economic sector available to these Marxists, that's the one that they attack the most. And of course, they go after small businesses and other aspects of the economy, but their main focus is on the energy sector for that big reason, because if they can leverage that and get that into this sort of Green New Deal that they've been talking about for many years, then the entire American economy falls into line into this more collectivist, socialist kind of model. So keep in mind that that's sort of the backdrop of every single thing that they're doing. With regard to ESG, remember, ESG, just like DEI and CRT and the entire vegetable soup of acronyms coming from the left, it is a form of Marxism. So ESG is a form of economic Marxism. And what we're now seeing in the financial sector, Tommy, is a direct result of industries and businesses going down the road of ESG, which sounds good on paper. The leftists always make things sound good on paper. Environmental, social governance, DEI, diversity, equity, and inclusion, but to the exclusion of focusing on their core mission, which is providing for a good or a service at a reasonable price for the consumer, delivering for their shareholders, and upholding their main mission, which is driving their business and making profit. So they've moved away from those core missions and toward this woke social justice nonsense. And the direct result is a collapse of certain banks, which could have more contagion and perhaps even overflow into the broader economy.
I want to go back to talk about just that, this Silicon Valley Bank bailout, because it was a bailout, no matter how they like to market it and package it for the American people. I also thought this was just so ironic. There was a tweet over the weekend from President Biden, and he tweets it a lot about holding, the billionaires accountable. He's a capitalist, but billionaires need to pay their fair share. It shouldn't be on the backs of the working class that they make all their money. And then this was just days after, by the way, the Silicon Valley Bank bailout, where he essentially bailed out the billionaires. I mean, when you look at what happened with SVB, this is the ultimate bailout of billionaires. But again, they tried to market it like they were helping small businesses make payroll for their employees. And the American people bought it hook, line, and sinker for the most part.
That's because they always have the protection and the amplification of the press, Tomi, right? So they can always count on the press to amplify and carry their lies. And then the American people, for the most part, only hear one side of the story. I mean, thank goodness for shows like yours and Fox News, and there are some other outlets, my podcast. But there are places to get the truth. But for the most part, the propaganda press is just out there to advance an agenda and to protect the liars here. Look, with regard to SVB, yes, they did have a lot of accounts that were small businesses and individuals who were in peril, but the vast majority of their depositors and frankly their investors were Silicon Valley titans. These were venture capitalists. These are tech companies that have very deep pockets. And the other thing that they have, Tomi, they have deep connections to the Democratic Party. Mm-hmm. Joe Biden, Gavin Newsom, Nancy Pelosi, Maxine Waters, the list goes on and on. So, of course, when this bank was engaged in all of this woke nonsense and also, not prepared for rising interest rates, which were a direct result of Biden and the Democrats' out of control spending that created the inflation in the first place, when this bank started to collapse, of course, a Democratic regime would step in and bail it out. And you know who's paying for it, Tomi? It's you and me. And the rest of the deplorables, we're footing the bill for this, right? The hardworking average American.
And again, all of this information gets swept under the rug because every week there's a new catastrophe, a new calamity. And now this week we've got the Trump arrest, the possible indictment. We know that this case is evolving literally by the moment, but I just spoke to Kash Patel about this. We were talking about there were some shakeups in the Manhattan DA's office. There are some people that maybe think that this is going in the wrong direction. They paused the grand jury hearings for the day. But I want to get your take, because you and I were on Hannity last week, I believe it was, and Sean asked us about the infighting in the Republican Party. Well, this week it kicked up about 50 notches, but it kicked up between who else? Ron DeSantis and Donald Trump. So in my opening, I said this, and I said this on Sean's show as well. I don't understand the Republican strategy of taking this horrible persecution, this political weaponization against Trump, and then turning all of the GOP cannons at Ron DeSantis. I don't think strategically for us as a party that makes a lot of sense. I understand why it makes sense for Donald Trump, but I don't get what sense it makes for the average Republican who just wants to see us take back the White House. Do you think the heat on Ron DeSantis this week has been fair?
Well, look, this is politics, and politics is a blood sport, Tomi. So, look, there are things that are good for the country, things that are good for the party, and then things that are good for each individual candidate. So, look, if you're coming at it from the point of view of the party, the America First movement, and the country, we don't like to see fellow Republicans training their fire on each other. It makes us really uncomfortable. It distracts us from the bigger mission. And remember, we are in a war. We've been in a war for the country for a really long time, and only one side has been fighting it. The communists, the left, the system, the deep state. So now we've got more and more Americans paying attention to what's actually going on in the country and with us in terms of the fight, and focused on the actual enemy within. So we don't want to waste a lot of time training our fire on each other. However, we are going into a primary that is going to be very fierce. It's going to be very hard fought. I think most of it is going to be policy oriented. And you've got Donald Trump.
Monica, do you really think it's going to be policy oriented? Because I don't think so for a minute. I think maybe on the side of like the Nikki Haley's and the rest of them, they might focus on their neocon policies. But I think when it comes to Ron DeSantis and Donald Trump, I think Donald Trump is 100% going to go for the jugular, and it's going to be about personality, going to be about character, going to be about weakness. I don't think he's going to argue with Ron DeSantis about policy that much, because I think the two have very similar policies, and I think that they would, whoever is elected, have very similar policies to one another. So I think Donald Trump is just going to go low, 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 jugular. And that's what I think we're going to see from Trump, because we're already seeing it. You disagree?
Not entirely. I do think you're right to a great extent, because look, Trump has one speed: attack, right? And counterpunch. That's it. But he has been doing something very smart, Tomi, over the last really year or so, which is most of his major rallies and addresses have been policy oriented. And so what he is doing is driving a stake in the ground in terms of his record of 4 years as president, and then where we are right now in the catastrophe of Joe Biden, and then what he would do as president in 4 years if he is reelected. So what he is doing is driving a stake into the ground and forcing all of the other Republicans to react to that. And if they agree with him, they're looking like they're copying him, right? That they're just echoing what Donald Trump is saying. And Ron DeSantis got some pushback on that with his position on Ukraine from the establishment, the rhinos, and others who support that engagement. But also he's forcing others like Nikki Haley to oppose him. So he is actually setting the policy framework. That's what I meant by how I think it's going to be policy oriented, because everybody's going to have to respond to Trump. But I do agree with you that he's going to haul out the nicknames. He is going to just, shoot from the hip, and it is going to get personal, because remember, all of these people want the throne, but there's only one throne, and they're going to have to fight it out to get it.
I personally think that there is one throne, but I think even if Donald Trump doesn't get the throne, he's going to make his own throne, which is going to be bigger, and he's going to set it next to the other throne, because that's just Trump, and we love him for it. I don't think he'd ever stop running for office. I really don't. And we love that about him. We love the fact that he's a fighter. He's never going to change his style. I wouldn't want him to. I would just hope that, at least at this stage, he doesn't make the personal digs at Ron DeSantis about his past or him partying with underage girls. I mean, all that stuff to me is like very what liberals do to try to cut Republicans off at the knees, and it's usually BS. I don't like that. But the last question I have for you, because this has been the ongoing argument all week long, and it's been a masterful strategy by the Trump team. But do you, Monica, believe that Ron DeSantis is establishment?
I think he's got establishment backing. Remember, he spent a couple of years in Congress, and he's got a congressional record that he is going to have to defend now that he is running for president. And I would answer it this way as well. The Republican Party is completely different because of Donald Trump. Donald Trump has so smashed the paradigm of what the Republican base, but also independents, disaffected Democrats, what they expect and want in a Republican candidate, that the ground is completely different. So while I don't think Ron DeSantis is establishment, while I do think he's been an extraordinary governor in the state of Florida, while I do think he's got a tremendous political future ahead of him, the question remains is, does he understand that the ground beneath him has shifted, that this is not pre-2015, that the country, the party, and the movement are so different that he needs to be different as well if he wants to succeed in this primary, okay? So I would lay it that way. And right now, I have not quite yet seen from Ron DeSantis that he understands that point. The establishment is trying to drag him. I don't know whether he's going willingly or not. That remains to be seen. But the establishment is trying to reset the party and the country to pre-2015. They're trying to make Donald Trump into like a historical aberration, like he never existed, right? The media is doing that as well. So is Ron DeSantis going to operate sort of in that pre-2015 context, Or does he understand that this is now an America First movement and he's got to operate in that? That remains to be seen. If he navigates that successfully, then he will be successful. But if he doesn't, Donald Trump and the America First movement are just going to run right over him and everybody else.
Oh, I agree, but I don't think that Ron DeSantis is not the America First movement. I think he is the America First movement. I think he's a new generation of the America First movement, but now he's got to battle what I believe is somewhat of his mentor, right? So I think that that's what we're setting up here, but I don't think it's fair to label Ron DeSantis establishment just because he's not Donald Trump. I mean, I think that you can be America First, and I think you can be MAGA all the way and not be Donald Trump, because he did change the landscape and other people can follow in his footsteps, but maybe just have a better chance of winning and winning independent. So that's my thought on it. But, you know, it's masterful that they're labeling him that way. Whoever is over in the Trump camp has been doing a great job. And I like both men, so I hope that they can keep it as clean as possible, but I don't expect that. Monica, thank you for being here and giving your insight. And I hope to see you on Hannity again very soon.
Such a pleasure, Tomi. Thank you so much.
Of course.